Hello, 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 and welcome to Kaplan's event. We're going to be talking about applying in 2019, and we're so excited that you decided to join us tonight. We're going to be talking about all the big questions that you have probably been thinking over this fall, thinking through the spring semester, what's going to be up on your plate. But before we get started, I want to learn just a little bit more about you. So first of all, tell us, where are you logging in from? Rep your school. Where are you from? So many great schools that are going to be out there. Very cool. I see UC Riverside, rock on. Some UC schools at the UCLAs. Ohio State, rock on. Duke, got to represent some on the East Coast as well. Vassar, nice. Notre Dame, USF, I was just there a couple weekends ago, rock on. Cornell. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. So we're talking about applying in 2019. There's going to be a lot of different pieces to the puzzle, of course, when we're talking about medical school. But the first thing that I want to know is, I'm guessing we've got some people who aren't applying in 2019. So what year are you planning to apply to med school? I'm sure we've got some folks who aren't necessarily going to be applying just this year. You're a little bit of a gunner. Maybe you're ahead of the game. You're still welcome. We're glad to have you. Welcome, welcome. So all my freshmen, all my sophomores, juniors, folks even in seniors in grad school, welcome. We're excited to be able to talk about applying to med school no matter what year that's going to be. Tonight's really your event, so we want to answer the questions that you're asking. Of course, we have looked at some that students ask us all the time, and we're going to address some of those as well. So please do keep that chat coming in and let us know what your big questions are going to be. So you'll be able to see the handout that we've prepared for you over at our bit.ly link, so do check that out. That's the bit.ly applying 2019. And if we don't get to something tonight, we're always happy to help you. Give us a call at 1-800-CAP-TEST or make an appointment with us at the Future Doctor You Can Book Me link also in the chat. But tonight, I am not the star of the show. It's our pleasure to introduce you to Raj Thakkar. Dr. Thakkar is an admissions consultant for Kaplan. So that means he meets with students just like you regularly to help them be better prepared for all the different aspects of the admissions process. And he's been through it himself. He's a graduate of Johns Hopkins and Georgetown University, and he completed his internship in general surgery. He's now in his residency in neurological surgery. Welcome, Dr. Thakkar, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Liz. I really appreciate the warm introduction. Welcome, everyone. I'm really happy that you're all here, and I'm really excited to share a lot of information tonight. I know a lot of you are applying in the 2019 cycle, some in 2020, and it looks like there's a few from 2021. So we've got some gunners in the room. That's great. And so we're going to be talking about quite a few things, and I think that this is really going to help you folks prepare for what's coming ahead. You know, the application cycle can be pretty daunting, but that's our job. We're here to help you guys get through it. So I think with that, we can go ahead and start.
Thanks so much. So the first question that we have is, how do we know if medical school is going to be right for us? But I'd love to ask you, Dr. Thakkar, how did you know that medical school was right for you? What were some of those early indicators?
So the big thing with medical school is that, and this is a great question because a lot of people are turning more towards other schools like PA school and nursing school. Medical school's different. And the reason why is because if you are one of those folks who are, self-driven, intellectual, and you really want to be a team leader and join a profession that is completely selfless, then medical school is the perfect fit for you. It goes way more beyond that as well. A physician is the biggest, a leader of a team, the team being nurses, technicians, physician assistants, and any other ancillary staff. And as a physician, it's your role to kind of guide the patient through their care from start to finish. That can be either outside the hospital in a clinic or inside the hospital. So in terms of figuring out if medical school is right for you, the biggest things that you should be asking yourself is, are you willing to dedicate yourself to a lifelong commitment of selflessness and helping others? And if that sounds like you, then that's what you should be pursuing. Just applying to medical school and being a physician.
And what about yourself? When you were an undergrad or even earlier than that, kind of what led you in this direction?
Sure. So I had a lot of friends went into various professions. And coming from a science background myself, I majored in neuroscience. I found that I love the lab. I love the clinical work as well. And medicine was a nice marriage between the two. And so looking forward, I kind of was initially going to pursue a PhD and decided that I loved working with patients. Nothing made me happier than working with patients. And it was something that you could do, or I could do, at any time of the day, whether it was 3 a.m. in the morning or 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And so looking at that, I found that medicine was one of the avenues I wanted to pursue. The nice thing about medicine is that you can also pursue research while you're doing medicine. So it was a great combination for me. And I knew right then and there that this would be a career that would be not only just personally fulfilling, but intellectually satisfying.
Absolutely. It's great to hear that you can do both, because I think sometimes students do think that, oh, I love this research. Does that mean that I need to be going the PhD route? So that's wonderful to hear that your experience has been, you can do both, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
So are there certain classes? I mean, we know we can all look at the prereqs, right? We know general bio, we know general chem and orgo and things like that. But what are some courses that you feel like are essential, and then the courses that perhaps might be more optional, but you found to be really valuable while you were in medical school?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to take the time here to kind of stress that the humanities are important. A lot of the folks that you're going to come across in the medical field, whether they be patients or other staff, are going to, learn more about you, and they want to learn all the interesting things about you. Yes, you're going to be a doctor, and you're going to have to take care of patients and know all the medical knowledge. But what makes you different from your peers is kind of the other stuff. And so humanities are very important, whether that's music, writing, anything else. I think that that's very, very valued. Now, that aside, we all, like you said, Liz, we all know about the prerequisites: biology, chemistry, organic chemistry. But going through medical school, I can say that what would have prepared me the most, looking back at college, were a few courses: biochemistry and cellular molecular biology. I think if you have the option to take these classes at your institution, sign up for them, because they're going to take you very far in the first few years of your medical school career. Genetics is another one. Now, these are all science-heavy courses, and they're usually advanced level courses. But I think that they provide a lot of benefit, and they'll prepare you really well to do extremely, extremely well in your first few years of medical school. And that's where you want to be. It's going to separate you from your peers, and it's going to land you a great residency.
Awesome. When we think about all of those pieces, so we are kind of coming at it from an academic angle, but I also broadening out into not just science courses, which is great, but let's also think about all the other parts of an application that really round out who I am as a medical school candidate. What are those extracurricular activities that you feel like can really make the difference and should be invested in? I think a lot of times I talk to students whose schedules are already really full, taking 18 hours, you've got lab classes, maybe you're trying to do some research. How do we pick extracurricular activities and make sure that we're doing the right things?
Sure, sure. So my advice to students is that do what you love. And I really, really mean that, because when you talk about these things during your interview and during your application, it's really going to show. The things that you love are going to come out, and interviewers just love hearing about those things. And those could be anything from hobbies and interests. I had clients or students who were skiers. Some were pianists. The other extracurriculars that are the traditional ones are the ones that you don't want to skip, though. Those being volunteering. You want to be able to volunteer in any capacity. Clinical shadowing, that's a big one. So a lot of medical schools are looking at applicants who have some sort of shadowing experience. This is the field that you want to go into, and by having some experience in the field before, really, really convinces admissions committees that you're dedicated to want to pursue a lifelong, career in this field. So clinical shadowing is excellent. And like I said, the volunteering is great too. Some folks, and I get this question a lot, ask me about research. And that is a coin toss. If research is not your thing, or if you don't have enough time in your schedule, then it may not be of the best benefit. But if you have the chance to do even some sort of clinical project that may take a semester's worth of work, I strongly suggest that you do it.
Well, and to add on to that discussion, we've got some great questions about shadowing, kind of a combination of what are some ways to get connected with physicians that you would suggest. You know, you can kind of have students be their own best advocate. How can they connect? But then also, what should their goal be when they think about how many hours they would be asking that physician, or would it be multiple physicians? Kind of help us understand shadowing a little bit further.
Sure, sure. So my advice is get your shadowing experience early. You will want to shadow a lot of physicians initially. And I say that because I advise a lot of students that try to find a field that interests you. And that may take some time. So as a freshman, sophomore, even junior, you may be able to go into the clinics and shadow various different amount of specialties, whether it be anything from surgery, family practice, physiatry. And I think that once you find your niche field, stick with that. At least a semester's worth would be ideal, because you want to be able to get a strong letter of recommendation at the end of that. You don't necessarily need to get a recommendation from all the other physicians that you've shadowed, but the one that you spend the most time with would be the ideal person to ask.
That's really helpful, I think, especially to get the idea of generally seeing a lot of different patient interactions and then honing in on one particular one. So thank you for that. Talking about recommendations, let's bring that over into the academic realm. So when we're thinking about different professors that we've had classes with, and I run into this question from a lot of students who are at big research universities, you know, maybe there's 30,000 plus undergrads on campus. Like, what are some recommendations that you have for whom to ask, but then also how to establish a relationship when you might be in a lecture hall so that it's a meaningful recommendation?
Absolutely. And I think this goes with in terms of physicians as well, but let's talk about the professors. So a lot of students start out their first few years in college in large lecture halls, just like you mentioned, Liz. And it can be very difficult to shine out from the crowd. If you are one of those students who receives A plus and A in the course, it may be a benefit to spend some time with the professor at their office hours, get them to know you a little bit better. And that may be able to garner a letter of recommendation. But my advice is that if you are enrolled in their upper level courses, spend a little bit more time with them in terms of the coursework, and it'll allow you to get some more face time with them in their office hours. Those would be the ideal professors to have you ask. The thing is that your goal is to get letters of recommendation from professors that know you. Now, a lot of big institutions have professors who have a large CV or resume. They're big research professors. They have a lot of grant money. They're very well published. And a lot of students ask me, should I ask those professors for a letter of recommendation? Now, that may be beneficial for some if you've worked in a lab or if you know them very well. But if you don't know them as well, you have to keep in mind that there are going to be a lot of other students on the same boat who ask them for letters of recommendation. And they may not be able to write you the best letter of recommendation that you want. And that is the goal of a letter. You want to be able to have the professor talk about you and convince admissions committees that you are the right fit for medical school. And that I cannot stress enough. So if it is a professor that is a higher level, that's from a higher level course, and someone that you've got to establish a relationship with, who may not have that long list of publications, or may not be that well known, it is completely fine, because they're going to write you one of the best letters that you're going to get.
That makes so much sense. And I think relationship is so much at the heart of being a good physician that it makes sense that that's what schools are looking for, right? They're looking to see the character of the student who will ultimately be caring for these patients. So that's great. One of the questions we're seeing is about some non-traditional pathways. Really, if you're coming back to it, maybe in your mid-20s or even later as a second career, are there any pointers sort of first on perhaps just the academics sort of waking up all of those courses, but then also just as far as strengthening application with that story to tell.
Yes, absolutely. So now it's actually more frequent than it was before. And I think it's more of the norm, that there are a lot more non-traditional applicants to medical school. I believe the average age of of medical school matriculant is about 25. So there are a lot of people who pursue other careers before circling back, and that's completely fine. And that begs this question, what do people do to become competitive for medical school once they've already graduated from college? Well, the first steps really are making sure you have your bearings down. That is, that you want to be able to contact your university and let them know that you're going to be applying for medical school. Some universities actually allow graduated students to still go through the pre-med admissions committee interview process, so they can write them a letter or a committee letter. Other schools do not do this, but the students still should notify their advisors. The reason why is because they also need to get those letters of recommendation that we talked about, but they also need to get their registration and their coursework and their transcripts all put together for the application itself. So that's the first step. The next step is identifying where your deficiencies are. So if some students have great MCAT scores, but not such a great GPA, you may want to consider pursuing a post-baccalaureate program or a master's program of some sort in order to boost your credentials for medical school. If you are lacking in the volunteer department, that may be another way or another avenue to pursue in order to boost your credentials. So really identifying your weaknesses and working on them so they become a strength is in your best advantage. And there are a lot of people who circle back and apply to medical school later who have this strategy, and it works. I've seen it. I've worked with students on this. And although it may take another year, it's well worth the wait because they do achieve admission to medical school.
And that's ultimately our goal. We're here to be able to help these students do the same. And I think one of the things that a lot of folks are interested in hearing your opinion on would be, should we knock out the MCAT and focus on that solely and then focus on admissions? Do you kind of do both of them at the same time while you're in school in spring? How would you put those pieces together ideally as an applicant this summer?
Sure. So ideally, we would have to get one and then the other. MCAT first, because that's what you need in order for medical schools to look at your application. And some students may not have that luxury. So the MCAT is the first step, and you need to take that as early as you feasibly can. And so some students take it in January of their junior year, and some take it in May. Some even take it in June or July. And so there are advantages and disadvantages for both of those. The advantages of taking it early is that you get it done. And if you get your score back and need to retake it, you have the opportunity to do that. Some of the cons of doing it early is that you may not have all the fundamental knowledge needed to do well on the test. Now, that's where some of our other products come in handy, like the Kaplan MCAT course, which I've personally taken. And so that may prepare you very well for taking the test. Taking it later is another option. Now, that is a little bit different in that, you may be more prepared. You may have all your prerequisite courses out of the way, but you're dealing with simultaneously taking a test and applying to medical school. So that could be a little bit daunting, and I've seen students do it, and they've done pretty well. So it's really dependent on what type of test taker you are, how much time you personally need to prepare for the test. And that is something that we can help you gauge as admissions consultants, looking at kind of your past coursework, but also kind of taking a survey on your study habits and so forth. Now, that's the first step. And the next step is applying. And you want to apply as early as you can. the application opens in May, and you want to be able to fill it out as much as possible before submitting it in June. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages of applying early. The advantage is that once it's in, that's it. You have nothing else to worry about, and it's a waiting game to hear back from schools. The disadvantages is that you need to be able to fill out this application, and a lot of people take finals around that time. So it can be kind of difficult. So making sure that you have a fine balance is key for a successful application. And that's something that we can certainly help you out with.
So tell us a little bit about how schools view taking the MCAT twice or maybe even 3 times if necessary, and how does that change the admissions process? Say if you have a 512, taking it once as compared to it's your second or your third score, and then maybe even let's say something more like a 508. So maybe we can kind of tell both of those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say the first scenario, 512, which is a great score, and you take it twice or 3 times. Some medical schools take into account your total 3 attempts, and they want to see where you're trending. If you're trending down, then that may be a kind of a red flag for them. If you're trending upwards, then that may be a benefit. One of the things that I want to stress to students is that other schools do this differently. Some schools actually take your best score from each of those 3 attempts and combine them. Other schools look at your most recent attempt and they take that as the final score. And then other schools look at the best of the 3 and take that as your score. So it really depends on the institution. And every institution is different every single year because admissions committees change. Now, let's go to the other scenario where the student has a 508. Now, it's a little bit lower score. And so it's about a little bit less than the 80th percentile. And it kind of, it would be of a disadvantage of repeating your MCAT score 3 times. And so taking it twice, I think, would be ideal. So if you didn't do as good as you wanted the first time around, your priority needs to be studying extremely hard, taking as many practice tests as you can before you take that second attempt, because you want to make sure that you do everything possible to avoid a third.
And when we think about doing that, because I know there's a lot of pressure once you have the first score that's maybe not exactly what you were looking for. And now let's say that we've gotten there, we've gotten closer to that 510 anyway, where we're going to be more towards the middle of the pack. Now let's talk about what the schools are looking for. If I have a certain GPA and a certain MCAT score, but I also have, great leadership experience and shadowing and research, all of those intangibles that are harder to quantify. Tell us a little bit about how schools evaluate based off of hard numbers versus more of the fullness of who the student is from the other aspects of the application.
Sure. So the first step really is the numbers. You need to have the numbers in order to be competitive for medical school. Now, that being said, different medical schools have different thresholds or cutoffs, and so that can be found on the AAMC. However, there are a lot of schools that are trying to turn away from that kind of traditional philosophy. I can tell you that the big research institutions, in the Northeast, in the Midwest, and the West Coast, they look at numbers and they look at high numbers. Now, the intangibles are important, but when it comes to those types of institutions, the intangibles may take a back seat. Now, for other students who have great intangible or valuable experience, who may not have the numbers that are as competitive, are still not out of the running for medical school. I think that if you cast your net wide, look at your state school, look at other kind of smaller schools in rural areas, you may still be very competitive as an applicant for medical school. And that's where we come in and we try to help you guys out, kind of deciding, looking at all the metrics and looking at your intangible experience, the volunteering, the leadership, and helping you decide, what would be the best type of school and the best fit for you.
And along those lines, I know that many students are going to apply to a wide variety of schools. And I always encourage my students to apply to some reach schools, some that are kind of, more, you're right in the middle, and then, maybe some that would be more safe in the process. But tell us a little bit about what research should we be doing? And the numbers are out there, we can all do that. But beyond just where I'm competitive, what are some other aspects of schools that should help me decide which ones I should be applying to?
Sure. So the biggest things that people need to look at are, number one, where they want to be. Location is key. What type of population they want to serve. In medical school, as a student, you're going to be doing some clinical years, your third and fourth years. And so looking at the population that you want to serve is also really important. And then finally, if you're looking at your interests, if certain schools have a research lab that you're particularly interested in, or a type of research, those may be ideal fits. If research is not your thing, and let's say you want to be a leader in a student-led clinic, look at some of the schools that actually have true student-led clinics. That may be another avenue, another thing to look at for a good fit. If you want to look at schools that have dual degree programs, that is something else that you may want to consider as well. Those who want to pursue an MD MBA or MD PhD or MD JD, those may be, not every institution offers those. So you want to be able to look at institutions and see what are the ones that offer these opportunities, and that's the type of research that you want to do prior to creating your list. And then, just like you said, once that list is made, you should organize it in such a way where you have some reach schools, you have some schools that you think are going to be a good fit, and you have a few schools that you may consider safety schools, so to speak.
That's a competitive process, and there's so many different components. One of the questions that I'm seeing a lot of really has to do with the gap year. So as you said, it is actually becoming quite common and even maybe desirable from a medical school's perspective for students to have some real world experience outside of their undergrad. What kinds of things should we be looking for in that gap year? Is it solely an opportunity for additional education? Are there opportunities that we should be pursuing for jobs or research? And is there one of those pathways that might be better than the others from an admission standpoint?
Yes. So that is a great question. I can't stress enough the importance of the gap year. It is a year in which the students they use in order to grow, to become better applicants. And I kind of touched on this before, but the thing is that I can't stress this enough, is that you want to be able to identify your deficiencies. Looking back at your college experience, if you can identify any weaknesses, whether it be in coursework, whether it be in volunteering, in leadership, or in research, these are the things that you want to identify and then pursue during your gap year. So if you're one of those students who may not have the best grades, you want to be able to kind of supplement that with any coursework that you could take afterwards in either a post-bac program or, like I said, a master's program. If you're lacking in the leadership department, you may want to take up a position in various organizations, a leadership position ideally, and work on cultivating that in order to become a better applicant. If research is something that you never did in college and that's the only thing missing from your entire package, and it's something that you do want to do, then that may be an avenue to pursue. And there are plenty of research jobs at big institutions around the country. A lot of cities have great research positions. Likewise, if you are someone who wants to work instead, that is completely fine. a lot of medical schools are starting to realize that people need to pursue other careers or jobs after college in order to provide themselves with enough money to even spend on the application process, which is expensive. And so that is at no fault to you, students. That's something that is completely okay as well. Volunteering is another one. If you hadn't volunteered enough in college, that may be something to pursue as well. But the big thing is that if you don't have any clinical shadowing, I strongly recommend that despite whatever else you're doing during that gap year, you're able to get that clinical experience during the gap year. Because adding that on top of everything else that you have, plus having the opportunity of potentially getting a letter of recommendation out of that, will go very far in the application process.
That patient-facing experience is always so important. One of the questions we got, we've been talking a good bit about some of the ways if we have a lower undergraduate GPA, we can post back, we can do the master's, demonstrate some academic strength and some alternate pathways. But let's talk about the opposite situation. Let's say that we have a student who has just rocked it 3.9, 4.0, but their MCAT score is not very competitive. Talk to us a little bit about how that might be perceived in the admissions process and what you would recommend those students do next.
Yeah, and that's definitely a lot of students I've seen have that same, been in that same scenario. And so if you're in that position, you want to first identify where you stand in terms of percentile. If your MCAT score is fairly low, below 80th percentile, I strongly suggest that you may want to consider retaking it. Now, once you've identified that, I think that it makes it easy to move forward in that potentially taking a course to help study for the MCAT may be in your best bet. Another thing is how long or how many times can you take the MCAT? And a lot of students say, oh, what is the limit? And that's a question I get a lot. And so in terms of taking the MCAT, you can take the MCAT. So it's 2 times would be ideal. You can take it 3 times in a year. In 2 years, you can take it a max of 4 times. So you really, really want to focus on trying to do well the first time, if not the second time. And that's certainly where we can help you out. Now, schools who look at applicants who have a great GPA, like you said, a 3.9, a 4.0, who may not have a strong MCAT, have different responses. I've seen some schools give them an interview straight away, and then during the interview ask, what happened during the test? Having a bad day is a valid answer in that scenario. Everyone has a bad test day. And so that is something that can certainly be okay to say if you're in that position. If you have not applied yet, then potentially taking it again before you apply would be the avenue I would suggest to pursue.
And I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying is identifying problems. And as an MCAT teacher for 10 years, I would say the same thing is true as well for those of you who are in that boat or feeling like your MCAT score is stuck. We need to identify what those problems are. Why are we missing the points? Being able to have the right resources so that we can transcend those problems as well. So definitely, I think that's an encouraging thing. We can help you increase your score, and we have seen students increase their score significantly. And so definitely get the resources that you need. You've done the hard work for 3 or 4 years. Let's get that MCAT score to show up for you. Let's talk a little bit about opportunities that are going to be other types of licensing or other types of patient interactions. So whether that might be something like a CNA for a certified nurse assistant, or I know a lot of my students have been EMTs. And so what are those offering to our students as they're thinking about being in this process? What are sort of the pros and cons as you think about going through those licensing processes?
Sure. So I think that having a license to work in a medical field, being an EMT, just like you said, being a CNA, or even an LNA, licensed nurse assistant, or pursuing any of those other certifications. Phlebotomy is another one. I think only works in your favor. And so if, for example, you were lacking in the clinical field and you had to take a gap year, pursuing a certification as an EMT or licensed as an EMT or one of the other positions certainly gets you a lot of credence from the admissions committee. They love to see these types of applicants. The reason why is because you're working in a clinical field, actually taking care of patients, and not just volunteering and shadowing. Shadowing, by definition, is that you're observing the physician or observing someone doing or delivering patient care. By actually possessing one of these licenses, you're providing that care, and looking towards medical school is the next step, really. And so by having those skills, not only prepares you for success in your career in medical school and beyond, but it really gets your foot in the door and convinces medical schools and admissions committees that you're dedicated to this, that you really, really want to do this, and you're doing everything you can to prepare yourself. So I strongly encourage that. That's something that is a great opportunity for a lot of students who are out of college right now.
And I think one of the great aspects of doing that as well, not only giving you the patient, is also really getting to be in the office. And like you're talking about leading, how much better are you able to lead as a team leader in the future if you've been a member? I think we've all been in those situations where like, I would do things differently if I were the leader, you know, so it kind of gives you that firsthand experience of how to communicate effectively as a team member providing care. So getting that inside look at the way the hospital works or the way that the office works, those are great opportunities. One thing I wanted to remind you, because we've gotten a lot of more personal questions, we do actually have one of our amazing MCAT teachers in our chat. So click that blue box. That is where you're going to be able to chat about your personal situation. I know we've seen lots of different questions that are a little bit more geared to your specific situation, and we'd love to address those. That's a great place to be able to put those. Another great question that did come up in the chat that I'd love to have you address would be about mental health. And it's one of those things that I think has become more easy to talk about, even though it's still very challenging to talk about. It's still something that we're becoming a little bit more aware of as a society. And so is that something in mental health or physical health, if that's an explanation for certain things that might show up on, say, our application as far as GPA, or maybe there was a semester or a year of struggles, how should we best communicate that? Is that something that would be helpful in our admissions process to communicate?
So that is a great question, because it is a hot topic now. And that is something that is up to student preference, but it's something that, if disclosed, you can certainly do it in a way where it is very understandable by admissions committees. Medical school is applying to medical school is a very competitive process, and then that I think that goes without saying. And a lot of folks feel the pressures. They know it's stressful. They know that, like you said, they're working 18-hour days and 6 days a week or more, and it can really get to folks. So mental health is of concern. And I think that a lot of medical schools these days are pushing towards their wellness initiatives and making sure that people don't burn out in medical school. I think that burnout can really start even before. So in folks who have these kind of concerns, I think that if you are able to identify that early on and rectify it, that will bode well in the admissions process. Medical schools love to see an upward trend in your career and in your trajectory, and so if you, let's say, had a bad semester and then started to perform well afterwards because of certain things that you did to correct any sort of deficiencies or any sort of stressors, then that would bode well for admissions committees. Disclosing that during the interview process also is something that may be of kind of personal kind of decision making, but it's something that that if brought up, you want to be able to have an answer for. So specifically, if you were to say, oh, I just wasn't doing as well during that semester, I did not feel up to it, or anything along those lines, then having an answer to say, yes, so this is what I did to help. This is what I did to identify my issues and correct them. And by having that in your back pocket as a response, I think would take you very far during your interview process and during your application process.
So I know we're getting a lot of questions about can we make up for a lower GPA with a high MCAT, or do you feel like it's going to be really necessary for additional academic work to be done? Can we just go rock the MCAT, come home with our 90th percentile or above score and apply this summer? Or should I really be waiting for that post-bac of that master's? And where would you say that threshold is? Because I know like low, it means something different to different
Sure.
people. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the thresholds and cutoffs, every school is different, but I can tell you with confidence that that those thresholds and cutoffs are slowly increasing every year. So there are two types of GPAs that medical schools look at, and those are calculated out when you put all your coursework into the AMCAS application. The AMCAS application being the primary application for medical schools. What it asks for is every single course that you've taken in your college curriculum and every single grade you've received for the course, and it automatically calculates a GPA for you. It calculates a few GPAs, actually. It calculates your GPA by year, so it can show a trend, and it also divides your GPA into two components, your cumulative GPA and your science GPA. So those are the two metrics in terms of GPA that medical schools look at. The science GPA being comprised of the grades you received in your biology, chemistry, physics, organic chemistry, biophysics, and other science-heavy courses, and mathematics courses as well. And then your cumulative being your total. Now, in terms of thresholds, for the science GPA, really the threshold for medical schools is about a 3.3, maybe a little bit more than that. 3.32 or 3.33. And so that's something that you really want to strive for. The cumulative GPA actually is a little bit higher. So you want to make sure that your GPA is about a 3.4 to 3.5 for cumulative GPA for you to be competitive for medical schools. Now that's not that would be the average kind of recommendation. I have seen some students successfully be accepted with GPAs lower than that. Now, those are usually the exceptions. They're not the rule. Now, they also had a lot of other things on their application which made them competitive. So, if you're looking at straight metrics, looking for those schools, those institutions that weigh metrics more than they do the intangible experiences that you have, those are the numbers that you're going to be shooting for. For GPAs lower than that, there are other options as well. Those other options being potentially DO schools or osteopathic schools, and perhaps even some of the non-traditional Caribbean schools as well.
Let's talk about some of your work as a consultant. I know you've worked with dozens of students over the past several years. And one of the questions that I have are, what are some of those mistakes that you see them making in their personal statements? In particular, I always tell my students that it's an opportunity to introduce yourself before they see your face. And so just like a first impression is going to be a lasting one, now that they've jumped through the hoop of these numbers we've been spending so much time talking about, now this is the first time that they get to introduce themselves and round out a bit of that story. And so what would you say are some of the mistakes that you've seen? And then also some of the top ways to communicate effectively in that personal statement?
Sure. So some of the mistakes that I've seen in personal statements include rehashing your entire resume, and kind of talking about it in a sequential order. And like you said, and I completely agree with you, that it's the first impression. It's besides all the other numbers and everything else in your application, the personal statement is supposed to be about you. And that's what I emphasize with all my students, is that it is an opportunity for medical schools to get to know the person behind the numbers and behind the work and activities and everything like that. It's your subjective, if you want to take that term, and it's basically you talking about why you think you're a good fit for medical school. Now, some folks may supplement that with maybe one, maybe two examples of from their resume, stating that this is what I've done and this is what I've experienced, and I think that it falls in line with what a physician does, and so that's okay. But really, a personal statement should be a document that convinces and argues for your admission to medical school. And the way you do that is you want to be able to talk about where you come from, what you have done up until this point, how you've identified that you are a good fit or a good for medical school, or that medical school is right for you. That first question that we went over. That is what needs to shine through your personal statement. And by doing that, you want to do it in such a way where it's a convincing argument for medical schools and admissions committees to take you, to interview you, and that's the purpose of it. It's one of the hardest things that you can embark upon during your application cycle, but that's why we're here.
One of the terms that I use a lot is you're marketing yourself. This is your copy for your ad for yourself, why I would make a perfect candidate for your school. But it's very of the moment as well, thinking culturally about what is your brand, and also being able to communicate what you're going to be bringing to the table for the school. Let's talk about the application pieces, because a lot of folks have just never even seen MCAS, like how it works, and kind of talk us a little bit through nuts and bolts of, May 1st, MCAS is going to open and what's going to be on there.
Yeah, so the AMCAS is comprised of several different divisions. Now, the easiest part is the demographics, putting in your information, your address, that sort of stuff, and that's the easy stuff. The next part really is putting your coursework in. Now, that can be a very tedious task. So when the AMCAS opens up May 1st, you want to be able to log in and take some time to really put in each single course exactly as it appears on your transcript. That may need to be done by obtaining an unofficial copy of your transcript. So that's something that a lot of folks may want to anticipate doing in order to prepare. The next step is your MCAT section, which is actually an automatic section where they pull in your MCAT scores through a different database. You just have to give them permission to do that. And then finally, the other big section, or there's a few big sections, are going to be your work and activities section. This is really where you get to shine in terms of talking about what you've done to prepare for medical school. These are the activities that you want to go ahead and talk about piece by piece and describe to admissions committees. And the way you do that is that you want to first list the activity. You want to talk about what your role in the activity was, but more importantly, what the significance of that activity was. And you have 15 opportunities to do that on the AMCAS application. And then you have the personal statement section. And that is somewhere that you can just copy and paste your personal statement into. And finally, there's a certification page. And once all those pieces are put in place, you want to be able to certify your AMCAS application so that people, reviewers, look over your AMCAS application. They take your official school transcript and they line it up side by side to make sure there are no errors. That can take up to 4 weeks to do. So applying early is in your advantage because you want to make sure that your MCAS application undergoes the verification process in a timely fashion. So I can't stress that enough. That's very, very important because that can hold up a lot of applications for students. And some medical schools won't even look at your application till all that is done, even though they may have a copy on their desk. So make sure that's done early.
One of the questions I get from my students a lot, especially if they do have to take the MCAT a second time, is it okay for me to go ahead and fill out and submit my applications with, let's say, a so-so, middle of the road MCAT score, and then update my application with a score perhaps from June, July, or August this summer that hopefully we'd be looking forward to the future, but that would hopefully be a good bit stronger? Or does it make more sense to wait until we have the second MCAT score to be able to send that off?
So I think that it would be in your advantage to apply early. If you have a mediocre score, middle of the road score, that's not low, then it would be in your advantage to apply early and then update later. And the reason for that is because once you submit your AMCAS application and things get verified and your grades are all in, you're going to start receiving secondary applications. Schools are going to reach out to you and ask you to fill out another essay specific to that institution. And so the earlier you apply, the sooner you get those secondary applications. If you apply later, you may get secondary applications potentially all at once, and that may make for a very difficult time filling out each and every one and getting them back in a timely fashion. So I strongly suggest that if you are in that position, apply early and then update later.
Let's talk about what you can do for someone who has prepared a personal statement and how you're able to make that better. What are some of those tweaks? I mean, I always think about grammatical errors and just simple things like that. But what are some of the feedback opportunities that you feel like you've been able to help students actually raise the level of their personal statement?
Sure. So I think that in terms of reviewing the personal statement, it really is as a consultant, I establish a rapport with my students and try to get to know them on a personal level to help them write a extremely strong personal statement. Now that being said, once the personal statement is done, I am personally okay with it being looked at by a physician or by a professor, someone with a fresh set of eyes. And that may be in your advantage. Now, there are disadvantages to that, and that being that those other folks may want to change your personal statement significantly. And so it really, at that point, is in the hands of the student. And if the student likes the changes that other people advise, then that's okay. And we work with them to try to create either a hybrid or kind of steer them in a direction that is appropriate for them. So there are, like you said, those grammatic tweaks and everything like that. That is absolutely essential. I can't stress that enough. But taking it to the next level, that takes a lot of work, and it takes more than a few iterations of the personal statement. And that's something that we work very, very closely with students in order to achieve.
let's talk about the other end of the spectrum, the more exciting side, which is interviews. So some of our students maybe have friends, or maybe themselves might be in the process hoping for them to receive that. So we've talked about the process of MCAS, your first round, you get your primary application finished, and then you receive your secondary essays, and then start crossing your fingers and toes and hoping for the interviews to come along. So tell us about when that starts to happen and kind of typically happens, and then what are some tips for interview techniques as well?
Sure. So interviews typically roll out, interview invitations typically roll out around August, September, and they can go as far as December, perhaps even January. And so that's from early to late. That's typically the part of the rolling admissions process. But that's when they can be extended. In terms of the interviews, they're an exciting time. They really are. They're your opportunity to get to know the school better and for the school to get to know you better. It's your foot in the door. Everyone on interview day typically has a clean slate. It means that you are one of the few that they're looking at in order to be a part of their next incoming class. And so everything up until that point is great, and it's gotten your foot in the door. But going forward, it really is about a successful interview. The things that make a successful interview. You want to be able to be, the obvious things. You want to be able to be dressed to impress. You want to look very professional. And that's the first things is first impressions, and going beyond that, when it comes to actually the interviews themselves, there are two types. There are the multiple mini interviews, and there are the traditional one-on-one interviews that you sit down with a faculty member. You want to show that you're engaged. You want to know everything about that school that you can, but even more so, you want to know your application like the back of your hand. They're going to ask you some hard questions. They're going to ask you a lot of easy questions. The biggest thing to understand is that the interview is like a conversation. And starting with the first response, you're going to be the one that's going to guide the discussion, because a lot of interviewers like to ask follow-up questions. And so if you think about it, the trick really is giving a great first response and then going from there. And I can't emphasize that enough. That's really the key to a successful interview.
Well, I want to say just thank you so much for being with us tonight and for all of this great information and support. One of the things we want you all to walk away with is the idea that you are still in the driver's seat. You've got plenty of time to be prepared to succeed when you're applying in May and June. And even if that timeline isn't 100% where you are, there's still options on the table for you, whether it's to improve your GPA by continuing your educational pathways, whether it's planning out and making sure that you use a gap year effectively to fill in those deficits of shadowing or leadership opportunities, whether you need to focus on the MCAT this spring and knock it out of the park in March or April so then you can really focus on your personal statement, or you need to talk with someone like Raj and make sure that you've got a good handle on what a good personal statement looks like. We've got you covered. There's a lot of great resources out there for you, and we want to make sure that you reach out to us and get the ones that you're going to be needing. You don't need to stress out. There's no such thing as an ideal candidate, as much as you might see that on the internet, someone tweeting out about how awesome they are. But overall, be keeping in mind that you can still improve your application. If you want to have a longer conversation with us, use that You Can Book Me link. That's what we're here for. Again, give us a call at 1-800-CAP-TEST. Teachers just like myself are answering that phone when you call. We'd love to be able to talk a little bit more deeply about perhaps your MCAT plans or what kind of help our consultants can provide for you. So check it out. Let us know how we can be of service to you. Again, thanks so much, ladies and gentlemen. And Raj, I'm going to give you the opportunity to sign off as well. But we all say thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks everyone. And again, as we were saying, feel free to reach out to us. We still have the chat open here. Let us know how we can help you. You can always check out at captest.com/MCAT all of our great events that are going to be upcoming, especially once finals are over and you're turning your attention to your spring MCAT scores. We're going to have some great practice events coming up. Definitely check those out. And let us know how we can help you in the chat. We'll be happy to direct you to those appropriate resources. Again, having a plan, that's the way forward. Making sure that you know when you're going to be accomplishing these things we've been talking about tonight. Don't forget that bit.ly link will allow you to download a handout with a lot of these questions that we have. And if there were questions that we weren't able to get to tonight, we're happy to be able to reach out and address those later. So again, reach out to us, let us know how we can help, and we'll be happy to connect you with those appropriate resources. Whether you're a freshman or sophomore, you're a junior, a senior, or you're in graduate school, we are going to be able to make sure that your next steps are going to be effective as you're going to be applying for admissions in 2019. Well, thank you all so much. And thank you to all of the teachers who've been helping out in the chat as well. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.